Let's start by creating a section. We can add a small element that contains the text my balance, and we'll add some styling to this element. We can add text as gray, maybe gray 400, and we can just ensure the text is of medium size. Below this we'll add an H2 element that contains the amount. So I'll just do a $sign and 100,000. We can add some styling to this element as well. We'll make it nice and big, like text 4XL, and we'll make the font bold to really make it pop. You can add the section here, and instantly you can see everything is flagged as red. In React you can only have one high level component. So we can solve this in one of two ways. Either we can add a React fragment like this. That will solve the issue as well. But what we'll do instead, and this will fix up the HTML semantics, is we'll add a main tag and we'll close it off at the bottom. This main tag also gives us an opportunity to clean up our spacing. As you can see, our text is touching the side, so it's the same issue that we had with the navigation. When we resize the page, we can see it's touching the sides and not really sticking with the maximum width. Let's add those styles. So on our main element, we'll add some styles. We'll add a container, max width of 2XL. Padding left and right of 6, and MX Auto to center the content. Let's save. That already looks way better. Now we can start adding our buttons. So I'll add a button, and I'll call this add expenses. I'll add another button just below it, and I'll call this add income. You can see our two buttons showing up, but they're not styled correctly. So let's fix that by adding some styling. On the first button, I'll add the classes. We'll reuse the button class that we created earlier. So I'll call that BTN. I'll do the same with the next button. Our buttons have now inherited some padding left and right and top and bottom, but it's lacking the proper colors. So let's go back to our global style sheet. At the moment we only have a class for button stranger. So let's add a primary button, and we'll add a button with some outline. So let's start with the primary button. We'll just call it button primary, and we'll apply some styles to it. Let's give it a background of slate 700 should do. I'll give it a border of slate 700 as well. And I'll give it a text color of lime 400. I'll create another variation of this for the outline. So I'll create a BTN primary outline, and we'll apply some styles to this, like border lime 400, and we'll give it a text of lime 400. Let's save. Let's go back to our page file and let's add those styles. So for this one, I'll add BTN primary, and for the second button, I'll add BTN primary outline. I noticed that we're missing the outline on this button over here, so let's see what we're missing. So we've specified the border color, but we also have to just add border to this. And I'll do that for the other two utility classes as well. So I'll add border to primary, and I'll add border to danger. Let's save. Great. I do want to fix up some spacing issues. So let's go back to our page file. For this section here, I do want to add some padding top and bottom. So we'll add a PY of 3. And let's fix up the alignment on the buttons as well. So on this section, I'll add some classes. We'll add flex, item center, we'll add a gap of 2 and some vertical padding of, let's make it 3. We can also see those hover effects on these buttons as well. Before we move on, I do want to fix up the formatting of this value. It's missing the true formatting of a currency amount. So what we'll do is we'll create a utility class with a reusable function that will take in a value and spit out a neatly formatted value based on the user's location. To do this, we'll create a new folder called lib. You can call this whatever you'd like. And within lib, I'll create a new file called utils.js. Let's create a new function. I'll call it CurrencyFormatter. It will take in one value called amount. JavaScript actually gives us an internal number formatter that we can use. It's part of this class over here. And the method is called numberFormat. This method takes in a few arguments. Firstly, it takes in the locale. I'll just put in EN/US for now. Secondly, it takes in an object. There are quite a few options available in this object, and you can just have a look at the documentation for all of it. But we will just use 2 of these options. So firstly, we'll specify the currency, which we'll put in as USD. Secondly, we'll specify the style as being currency. We need to assign this to a variable. I'll just call it formatter. We can then return formatter.format and the amount that we passed in. We're almost done. We must not forget to export this function. So back in our page.js file, we can now import that utility. So we'll just say import something from, we'll use the alias import again. So @lib/utils. And from utils, we can press Control space to see all the available imports, and we only have CurrencyFormatter available at this stage. So what we can do now is replace this text with the call to this function. So I'll remove this text, I'll add curly brackets. This is to invoke JavaScript code. I'll call our function and pass in some value. Let's do 100,000 again. We can now see that the balance amount is formatted correctly. And we now have a reusable CurrencyFormatter function for the remainder of the project. Next, we'll start work on this My Expenses section of the site. So this involves creating this header and a component that contains the color of the expense, the title of the expense, as well as the expense amount. This component also has a hover effect that we'll implement. So let's get started. So let's create a new section. I'll just call this section Expenses. So we'll add a new section. I'll create some spacing as well. So vertical spacing of 6 should work. We'll add a new header for My Expenses. I'll give this header a new class name and we'll make it 2XL. Below this header, we'll have a list of expenses. We'll start off by creating a wrapper div. If you'd like, you can also use an unordered list for this. I'll just stick to a div for now. We'll add a div that represents the component for each of these expenses. First, we'll create a div that represents that colored circle. So this little circle over here. And because it doesn't contain any content, we'll just make it a self-closing div. What is important for this div is the styling. We'll start off by giving it a width of 25 pixels, a height of 25 pixels as well, and a rounded off full to give us that circle effect. We also have to give it a color, so we'll use background color for that, and for now we'll just use yellow 500 as a placeholder. And there we go, we've got our yellow colored circle. Next, we'll add the title. For now, let's just type in entertainment. Let's style this heading as well. I'll just capitalize the text. We do want this yellow circle and the title to be next to each other, so we'll actually just wrap these two items in a div. And we'll give the div some styling as well. We'll make it flex, item center, and we'll add a gap of 2. There we go. That's sorted out our styling. Next, we want to add the amount for the expense, and these two need to be aligned correctly. Just below this div, we'll add the amount. I'll just use a paragraph for this, and we'll use our currency formatter to format this amount. For now, I'll just put something like 500 in here. We can see the amount showing up, but it's not properly aligned yet. So what we'll do on the div that represents the item itself, we'll add some styling. We'll use flex to align these items in a row. We will align the item center, and I'll add a justify between. When we save this, we can see the alignment is correct. Let's add the rest of the styling to make this expense item look unique. We'll add some padding left and right of 4, padding top and bottom of 4. Give it a background color of slate 700, and we'll round the corner slightly. That looks great. We can see what a list of these expenses would look like by copying our code. So let's maybe just add a comment to say this is an expense item. Let's copy all of this, and we'll just create a few more and save. We can see these items showing up, but there's no space between them, and they are quite close to the header as well. So let's fix up that spacing. We can do that by adding some styling to this outer div. So we'll start with class name. We'll use flex again to align these items, but this time we will use flex column to align these items vertically. We'll add a gap between these items, and we'll just add a margin to the top to give the expenses and the header some space. At the moment we are repeating code again, so we do not want to specify each expense item by itself like this. What we'll do is we'll create a reusable component for the expense item and simply pass the values to that component and dynamically render out the list. We can do that by creating a new file in our components folder. We'll call it something like expense category item.js. We'll create a new function for expense category item. We'll grab the code from the page file, so all of this. I'll actually include the comment as well. I'll just cut that, go to our new component, and return this. Let's remove that comment. We also need to export this function as default. One of the cool things about components is we can specify a list of properties that we expect to receive. We can then dynamically render those property values in our code. As an example, for this component we expect the following properties. We expect to receive a color, a title, and an amount. In our code we can then replace this hard coding with these values. Title, and amount. So the color is a little bit more tricky though. Tailwind really does not like it when we specify dynamic values. As an example, you would think that we could just provide the value like this, or maybe use a string literal to pass in the value of color. Unfortunately, I couldn't get that to work. So instead, we'll combine class names with another built-in Next.js styling feature. We can add a style prop to our div and then give it a few values. Style takes in an object as input, and we can specify something like background color and provide a color. So we'll just use our prop value for that. So in our page.js file, I'll actually remove these two expense items and we'll use our new component instead. So at the top of the code, I'll import that component from components and expense category item. I will also call the component expense category item. We can then add that component to our code over here. Saving this will fail as we are missing a few attributes. Firstly, we're not specifying any of the expected props like color, title and amount. Also, in the expense category item component, we are not importing this CurrencyFormatter utility function. Let's fix that first. So in our component, let's import that utility function. So we'll go to import lib utils. And then from utils, we'll import CurrencyFormatter. If I save this now, we should get a different error. Actually, we can see that nothing is being rendered within this item. That's because we haven't specified the props yet. So back in our page file, we'll start specifying those props. So what we need is a color. For the color, I'll just specify some hash value, something like 00. It should give us a black color. You can specify a title. I'll just put in entertainment again. And we'll specify an amount. At the end of the day, we'll be fetching a list of expenses from the database and then dynamically exporting that list from this logic. But for now, let's just create a dummy list of data. At the top of our code, I'm going to create a variable that contains some dummy data. So I'll just do const dummy data, and it's an array of objects. So we can expect each of our expense items to have an ID. I'll just call it 1. It should contain a title as entertainment as an example. We'll have a color like that black value, and we'll have an amount like this. I'll actually copy this down a few times. Okay, now that we have a list of dummy data, we can now go down to where we expect to output the list. So just above our custom component, we can start our code by using curly braces and then typing dummy data dot map. So map will loop through each item in the array. So we can actually give our values a name, something like expense. And this needs to return a value. So what we'll do is for each expense, we plan on returning this component. Just add the return statement as well. And we should see this component rendered out 5 times for each of the items in the list. But at the moment, these values are all hard-coded in these props. So we'll replace these hard-coded values with the values from the dummy data. Expense.color. Title is expense.title, and the amount becomes expense.amount. Let's give that a try. We're almost done with the expenses component. You might recall from the demo that when we hover over the expenses, they do have this animation. Let's add that to our project. This is actually quite easy. At the moment, we've got that effect set for all buttons. So all we have to do is go to our expense category item and wrap the item in a button, like so. We can now see that hover effect on all of these items. Thank you for watching this video. In the next video, we'll wrap up the layout section by including this stats section, where you'll learn a lot about chart.js. I'll I'll see you then. Bye bye.